action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today is a bit of a call to action first, as I've caught a power couple, Alex Jamieson and Bob Gower. Alex was one of the co-creators and co-stars of the Oscar-nominated documentary Supersize Me, and is also the best-selling author of 5 books, including Women, Food and Desire, and is a highly sought-after wellness expert and success mentor. She's been interviewed by Oprah, praised by the New York Times and CNN, amongst others, and is the host of Her Rules Radio, a #1 rated podcast. Bob is the amazing author of Agile Business, a leader's guide to harnessing complexity, as well as an in-demand speaker and consultant. He has keynoted gatherings on 4 continents while still finding time to work with leaders at huge multinationals like Chanel, Ericsson and Ford. The one and only Seth Godin says of their new co-authored book, Radical Alignment, successful communication leads to intentional action, which can only happen with enrollment. This book offers you a breakthrough in finding all 3. Welcome to the show, Alex and Bob.
Hello, thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Right, so we normally start with 7 quickfire questions, but given there's 2 of you, there's 4 each to navigate. So starting with you, Alex, Mac or PC?
Mac.
Writing or painting?
Painting.
Oprah or Ellen?
Oprah.
And finally, a bucket list or fuck it list?
Fuck it list.
Brilliant. And Bob, tea or coffee?
Coffee all the way.
Alaska or Japan?
Ooh, tough. I'm going to go with Japan today, but ask me again tomorrow.
Cuban rum or Irish whiskey?
Irish whiskey.
And lastly, the Dubliners or U2?
I would go with the Dubliners.
Nice. Okay, well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get to your new book and the topics that surround it, on this show, we love to celebrate the sometimes linear, often quite scenic routes that guests take in their career. So how did it start for you both? Were there any unusual first jobs along the way?
I love that you say linear. It's only linear in retrospect.
Yeah. Seriously. How much time do you have to talk about it?
I need the full hour.
Do it.
I was a taxi driver in Alaska. I was a stonemason in Virginia, a carpenter in Pennsylvania. I planted trees in Louisiana. And that was all before I was about 22. I also taught English in Japan for many years and was a newspaper designer. I was design director of the San Francisco Examiner for quite a while, as well as some other weekly papers in the Bay Area. That's all before I started this career, the career that I'm on.
That's incredible. Can you compete with that, Alex?
Oh, my goodness. No, I mean, Bob's got 10 years on me, so that's not really fair. But my first paid job was shoveling whole wheelbarrows full of bark chips for 50 cents a load for my parents. It was like the sweatiest work. And it took all summer to earn enough to buy my first skateboard. But I was very proud of that. And then my first proper job, that I got paid from a non-family member, I was a dishwasher at the age of 14 at the Muffin Break, which was a cafe pre-Starbucks. Yeah, and I have to be honest, the careers that we have, certainly my career, did not exist as an option when I was thinking about what am I going to be when I grow up. So the linear path to where we are doesn't make any sense to my younger self.
No. And to be honest, that's exactly what we like. It's what we celebrate. And it's a point I try to articulate to young nephews and nieces that I have who sometimes maybe overthink and certainly over-concern themselves with what the right route is.
Yeah, we're raising a 13-year-old artist right now. I'm super excited that he's like building miniature skateboards in his room and then going out and selling them at the skate park today.
Amazing.
Like, okay, those are skills that will get you through the rest of your life.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. Oh, well, good on him. And then Alex, so you studied at the National Gourmet Institute and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition.
Yeah, I actually have a degree, but I've done nothing with that history degree. It's everything I did after college that's led me to where I am now.
Okay. So how did you start there and why did you start there? And then equally, why have you done nothing with that degree? Was it an experience that you learned from and then changed tact and moved direction?
So I started as a journalism major in college. And I hated the classes, so I switched to history because they were just a lot more fun. They were more interesting. And I did just as much writing, if not more, in the history classes. So I ended up becoming a writer, just not getting really good at grammar because I never finished the grammar classes. But it was after college in my mid-20s when I actually got really sick and kind of stumbled back into food as healing and, the holistic health world that my mother had tried to drive into my soul, but I rebelled against as a teenager. So I'm the kind of person that has to learn things the hard way on her own, I guess. So it was that path of discovering kind of that self-healing world that then led me into, it's not just food. Even though we ended up making Supersize Me, which was this kind of like global phenomenon, it then it went a level deeper. It's like, how do we think about our bodies and where do we get these ideas about what a good body or a bad body is, and then base our self-worth on our physical appearance. And then let's get into patriarchy. And it just, it exploded from there and became this kind of creative leadership coaching in the last 10 years.
Yeah, very cool. Very interesting indeed. Bob, you became one of the first people in the world, I understand, to earn an MBA in sustainable management. So, how did your paths cross? How did you guys meet? And then how did you end up both working on positive psychology?
Wow. Yeah. And so I actually came to the MBA a little bit later in my career. That was after the design career, after sort of the .com boom and bust, which I rode in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. But before that, I mentioned I'd lived in Japan for a long time. I was teaching English to make a living, but I'd really been spending most of my time there studying Zen meditation and martial arts. And I went there because I was very interested in kind of, let's call it personal development, like trying to figure myself out, trying to figure out my place in the world, trying to be a good person. I had an undergrad degree in philosophy mostly. It was sort of a kind of a mixed bag of things, but philosophy was the core. I always wanted to understand how the world operated. And I always had a sort of knack when I studied philosophy. One of the easiest courses I found, unlike everybody else in my school, was formal logic, was sort of the basics of logic. And so I've always had this kind of knack for being able to simplify things that are really complex. And that's not a career. That's not it's not a skill. It's a skill that seems really valuable. People value it in conversation, but it doesn't have like the mark of, you should go do this now. It's not, it's not like spatial reasoning where you're like, be an architect or a photographer. So I had quite a bit of a struggle, actually, I think, trying to figure out what I really wanted to do and how I really wanted to contribute to the world. And I stumbled upon, actually, after my grad degree in sustainability, I stumbled upon something called Agile software development, which some of your listeners may be quite familiar with, which to my mind is a place where, sustainability kind of has at its core of thinking this idea of systems theory or complexity science. Like you're looking at the world, you're looking at things as complex adaptive systems. And Agile does exactly the same thing. It just does it from a very different angle. It's looking at human organizations as complex systems. And so I thought, okay, this excites my curiosity. And so I was fortunate enough to get a job where I got to travel around the world, converting or trying, I should actually say, trying to change organizations and the way they operated, and kind of failing over and over again and struggling with it quite a bit. And along the way, I moved to New York City, and I went on a date with this beautiful blonde lady that I met at a dinner party. And I asked her what she did, and she told me that she had been in this movie. And I was like, oh, I remember you from this movie. I was totally into you in that movie. And slowly, we just had conversations over and over and over again, because her work is doing behavior change with people, and my work was doing behavior change with organizations. And I think we were both at this transitional place in our career where we were really asking ourselves some very deep questions, like, what am I good for? What am I really trying to accomplish in the world? What am I really trying to do in the world? And we just found ourselves, I think, over and over and over again, having almost the same conversation, like, oh, that's what you're struggling. That's what I'm struggling with, but just sort of at a different scale. And so I think that's kind of how certainly how our romance began. And then at 5 years in, we decided to kind of engage in some professional collaboration, which has resulted in this book.
Incredible. Can I ask then, when you started to talk about the problems that you were both trying to simplify and solve, albeit for individuals and people versus organizations, did you notice there were significant parallels, especially if you sort of look under the organization bonnet and it's made up of people? Were there parallels to explore further?
Well, I'm going to insert myself here because there's a deeply personal and vulnerable aspect to both of our work, which is we both grew up in dysfunctional families, and we both grew up really struggling to bring our true selves and have boundaries in conversations that mattered. And when my son, Bob's stepson, was about 5 or 6, he was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADD. And very quickly, he started having this real downward spiral in his self-worth as a tiny, tiny kid, because he couldn't read as fast as the other kids. And he was getting punished in school because it took him so long to do work and he just wasn't getting it. And so we started to see the struggles we had as kids were, adjacent to what he was experiencing. I stumbled on this positive psychology in terms of tools that we could use to help our son have resilience and a growth mindset. And we looked at each other and we're like, we need this too. We need this personally, but also, oh my gosh, this is what all of our clients, whether it's one-on-one coaching or organizational change, everyone needs this. And we've joked many times that while Bob is leading these C-suite executive boardroom meetings, people are just bringing their family systems and habits into work constantly. So getting kind of a psychology tool suite was really valuable for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit on something really powerful there. The fact that everyone needs this, and you had that very personal and arguably the best motivation to produce this suite. So your book, Radical Alignment, is due out, I believe, on the 11th of August, so very soon after this podcast has been released. It's a book about difficult conversations, exactly what you've just articulated. So where did the idea for a book like this come from in terms of who would benefit from it? Or is it literally as easy as saying, well, in theory, everyone can benefit from this book?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually been the struggle with marketing the book and positioning the book for us, is that it sits, we think, actually right in between. And I know you're a marketer and you might appreciate this, that trying to market something as two things is really challenging, but it really is both a very personal, a personal development tool. It's been one of the foundational personal development tools that we've actually used in our lives. And it's by far the whole reason we wrote the book is because people kept giving us, this was a framework we developed and we taught it to people in different contexts. And then we started noticing that we kept getting calls about it over and over and over again. And we were just I was like, oh yeah, I had to describe that thing again today to somebody. And it takes about an hour to do it justice each time you describe it. So at first we were like, let's just create a Google Doc that really explains it. And then as we wrote the Google Doc, we realized that there was nuance that was coming out. And we also just began to use it more and more deliberately and really realized how powerful it was in making our lives better. And as Alex mentioned, we both kind of come from somewhat difficult childhoods, and And also, I've been married a few times. Alex has been married as well. And we were really determined to make this relationship work. So it became sort of the primary tool that helped that work. But then it kept extending, like I would go and facilitate a board meeting for, a very large organization that had a lot of problems. And then people would come back to me and say, that was the most significant experience we've ever had. That was, like all the things you've done or all the things facilitators have done for us recently, this was the tool that really was unlocking things for them. And so it took us a little while to realize that we had a product there. We're like, okay, we have the Google Doc, we have all of this market, like let's call it market research or market demand. So let's make it a book.
I think it's very easy to believe that the context of the boardroom is very different to the context of the playground, and clearly, that's both ends of the kind of spectrum here. But I'm not saying they're exactly alike, but it's very easy to convince yourselves that the types of behaviours and attitudes you might face in one don't also exist in the other.
Oh my God, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I feel like I spend half my time trying to get people to stop acting out, in boardrooms, because people are used to it, and because of power dynamics, certain people who are more powerful tend to act out more and face fewer consequences or more slow burn kind of consequences for acting out.
Yeah, and exactly. And like you say, I mean, how do you position something that can exist at opposite ends of a scale? I mean, it's exactly that issue. And in fact, there's parallels with your skill of being able to simplify the complex. So I don't know whether retrospectively, I know we're all guilty of trying to retrospectively force logic into explaining things, but maybe that's why you wore so many different career hats before you were 22, because you had a skill that was relevant in so many walks of life. And this sounds like exactly the same type of thing, really.
Yeah, I had a lot of skills and a short attention span, I think.
Well, what I've found in teaching this, and we'd love to share it with you, this seemingly simple tool to, especially my clients who, a lot of them are like women in tech sales, or they're, women who are like climbing the corporate ladder, becoming CEOs, et cetera. Like learning to have this conversational structure in a deeply personal setting, maybe it's with their family or with their spouse, it translates so quickly into the professional setting, and vice versa. Bob has taught this in boardrooms, and people who are leading organizations are like, that was great. I'm taking that home to my spouse. Like, we need to have this conversation about our vacation or about college for our kid. So it no matter where we teach it, people are taking it into the other realm.
Amazing. And what's the process been like working together? And I don't ask that to cause any kind of friction between you two, but we've had several authors on Call to Action, and I find it quite fascinating. We've had at one end of the spectrum Matt Watkinson, who's a wonderful guy, a good friend and author of The Grid, and he wrestled with it with his writing process for some time, versus a very recent guest called Paulina Tenner. And she practiced what she eloquently calls the vomit edit, where you literally just get it all out and then you rearrange it. So how was the process, and how was it working together on one book?
It's kind of a meta conversation in that we used the process that we're writing about to talk about how we're going to write the book.
Amazing.
Because like Bob said, we'd both been in relationships before. Me, most recently, I was in a marriage that had a serious creative production involved in the relationship that went badly and partially led to the destruction of the relationship. And that was my great fear. Both of us had the same fear. So we got really, really clear about okay, our marriage actually takes precedence. Our marriage is the most important thing. This book is a great idea, but if the book is going to destroy the marriage, we obviously choose the marriage. But then when we got into the writing process, we kind of stumbled upon and found a really graceful way to work together. And it was as simple as, all right, we're going to divvy up the chapters. You take one, I'll take two, take whatever feels best to us. We gave it our best shot, and then we just handed it over to the other person and had free reign. And again, this is another kind of boundary that came out of the conversation. I give you full permission to just edit the heck out of me. Like, you don't have to check everything with me. Just go to town. And we did that for each other. And we ended up finding a unified voice through that process. And it was honestly the easiest book I've written. And that's saying something.
And even easier than the books you wrote by yourself.
Totally.
Interesting.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting.
I'm a fan of Hemingway's write drunk, edit sober. Not that I actually write drunk, but it is a little bit of that kind of, like, I think there's a time, or actually Stephen King says it really well, I think, as well, where he says there's a time to write with the door closed, because you have to kind of get in touch with what you really think. And having this permission from Alex, we explicitly gave each other permission. It took us a little while to get there, but we explicitly gave each other permission to brutally and completely edit and rewrite, to the point of, deleting entire paragraphs or entire themes from the book, like just being really, really ruthless for our own vision. But then King also talks about you write with the door open as well, because you actually need feedback and you need someone else's point of view. So we would write individually with the door closed, and sometimes on top of each other's stuff. And then when we felt ready, we would kick it back to the other person, sort of writing with the door open. And then once we were happy with it as a piece ourselves, we would send it off to an editor. We actually hired an independent editor to kind of help us, someone who I'd worked with for years, who kind of knew my voice. She's my kind of blog editor, and she had helped me with a lot of articles over the years. So she knew my voice, and she helped us and she read a lot of Alex's stuff and got our voice. And so we did all of that before it even ever got to, our publisher's editor.
Amazing. That must have been quite equally rewarding and terrifying to just give each other that freedom. But then I suppose you need to kind of grease the wheels and allow that to progress.
Well, I tell you what, it actually wasn't terrifying. And I credit the basic tool that we talk about in the book is called the all-in method. And it's a really simple way to create what we call, well, we didn't name it this, but team psychological safety, where all the emotional landmines are uncovered. We know how we need to take care of ourselves and each other. So it's not like we were going forward just blindly editing. Like, we had a sense of what the other person needed and what we had full permission to do.
I want to get into the all-in method actually and ask you to elaborate a bit more on that if I may. But before we do, the idea of communication and effective communication is, of course, at the heart of what you're sharing. Why is it then that so many businesses and teams, couples, families, and groups who should be working together end up wasting time on this very unproductive conflict often?
I have so many different answers to that at different levels of granularity or different places on the ladder of abstraction. But I think right now where a lot of my attention is when I think of this is on, I think of it around, we touched on it earlier about sort of people bringing their family systems or some of their relational habits into the workplace. That I think often what I've seen in the organizations that I work with is a lack of emotional maturity. And I'm totally willing to throw myself into that camp as well. I've definitely, blown up at people when I didn't need to, taken things personally that weren't meant personally, been defensive. There's a therapist we love named John Gottman who talks about the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, essentially, like the four things that people do that spell doom for relationships, which is criticism, meaning you kind of locate a problem within somebody else, like you always do this and you always do that and you are like this, right? Rather than sort of saying, when you did this, I felt that, which is more of we're talking about behavior, we're talking about impact. Criticism is really talking about the person. So really critiquing the person. We see this all the time. I see this all the time in business. That leads to defensiveness, which is another of the horsemen, with the person just sort of arguing back. And then that sort of escalates into sometimes stonewalling, where people refuse to talk to each other anymore. Or what's the fourth horseman? Do you remember?
There's stonewalling, defensiveness, criticizing, and I can't remember the other one.
Can't remember the other one either. That's so funny.
Anyway, listener, go look it up.
Yeah, listener. Yeah, John Gottman. He's amazing work. But the idea is that when we approach something with emotional maturity, like if somebody critiques us or we don't respond with defensiveness, and we stay engaged and we stay involved, and we actually are willing to kind of work through the problems together. The reason that we develop this methodology, or the reason that we're bringing this methodology out, is because one of the things we find as being so valuable is kind of like some people talk about having a prenuptial agreement before you get married. And the defense of that is, right now you love each other, but if you're going to get divorced, you're not going to feel so great about each other. And then it's going to be really challenging to negotiate something that feels fair. So now, why don't you negotiate that thing that feels fair while you feel good about each other? It may feel weird to, bring up divorce when you're just about to get married, but, it's actually a way of taking care of each other. If you really love each other, take care of each other. And so we kind of bring that spirit to projects, to work projects. It's like, okay, we're getting ready to get into a really difficult project with each other. We're all likely bringing different levels of anxiety to the project. We're all probably bringing different levels of intent to the project. We're all bringing different concerns, different personal boundaries. We may, like for me, this may be the most important project on my docket right now, but for you, it may be number 3 or number 4, given everything else you've got on your plate. All of these things may lead, mismatches in all of these areas may lead to trouble down the road. They're like buried landmines that if we just stumble across them, we blow a leg off. But if we know they're there, we can either kind of detonate them in a controlled way, or we can avoid them altogether. So let's kind of lay all of our cards out on the table first before we start planning, before we start creating the project guidelines and working agreements and all of the things that kind of make the project up. So, and really it's taking care of, I think of it as the emotional body of the team. You're trying to create a really, really healthy emotional landscape, because that makes everything so much better, so much easier, so much more fun, and so much more productive.
And is there a way then within that framework and way of thinking, is there a way for individuals to analyze their own, say, strengths and weaknesses of their own style, if you like? Because there's so many complexities and different types of characters, no doubt, and that just throws in, more implications and hurdles.
I think a little bit of self-awareness goes a long way. I mean, we have this background in positive psychology, which means we basically have a ton of background in typologies, right? Everything from Myers-Briggs to, the strengths finders and all of these things, to even like weird stuff like astrology and Enneagram, and I've seen all of these things be valuable, mainly because they force a bit of self-reflection, and people are like, oh yeah, I see myself in that and I don't see myself in this. And I know people are really fond. We talked to a lot of people who are really fond of strengths finders. I haven't used it in a few years, but
yeah,
like knowing how people and I think, but I think at the core of that is sort of an emotional maturity piece, which is we're going to appreciate that there are different kinds of people in the world. And people really, and I think that's a core aspect of being emotionally mature, is being able to take someone else's perspective and being able to appreciate difference and being able to appreciate diversity. And of course, that's a whole other, big topic for a variety of reasons right now in our teams. And I think our work certainly intersects with that. We're not DEI people at all, but we certainly really value that work and intersect with that work.
Yeah, I think that even just the practice of whatever method of self-reflection you use has a kind of signaling power as well, doesn't it? Even if the benefits are, maybe in some instances almost like placebo-like, because it shows that you are trying to self-reflect. There's positivities from that. I'm way out of my depth here, Bob. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but that's how I instinctively feel.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I always joke. People ask me like what my Myers-Briggs type is, and I'm like, I'm the type that forgets what type they are. Like I almost never remember which combo I am. And yet we have friends who are like master facilitators of this stuff, and they'll break it all down, and I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. That makes sense. And then sometimes there's a little bit of confirmation bias. I'm like, was that really me or was that not me? But I think the whole just the process, like having a typology or having not even necessarily a typology, but just like a way of understanding yourself, I think is hugely valuable. Something we've been both really loving recently is Julia Cameron's Artist's Way. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's this.
No.
It's an amazing piece of work. And if you actually dig into Hollywood at all, you'll find the Artist's Way is literally everywhere. Like most writers, many actors and actresses all credit this work, credit this process. It's a 12-week program that you kind of self-pace and move yourself through. But at the core is a morning practice where you write your morning pages. Every morning you write 750 words or so longhand. just sort of stream of consciousness, but it's really about self-reflection. Actually, Tim Ferriss swears by it now. So I think that's
Oh, really? Okay.
About it. Yeah.
Oh, cool. I'll link to that in this episode listing then. That sounds amazing. And then, so going back to, I mean, Alex has given us a bit more detail on the all-in method. So I understand that the 4 steps are intentions, concerns, boundaries, dreams. Can you explain a bit more about that and how people can get started with the all-in method?
Yeah, I want to go back to what Bob said, calling it kind of a prenup for important conversations. I love thinking about it that way, that there's a few kind of ground rules that everybody agrees to. Everybody gets equal speaking time. You don't talk over each other. And you're not arguing points. You're really just sharing your thoughts and your feelings while you listen, and then you listen to the other people share their thoughts and feelings. And the first step, and this is such a huge thing for me, it seems so like, oh, duh, no, I didn't think of this 20 years ago. You get really clear on what topic you're discussing. I know that sounds so banal, but truly, I didn't have most important conversations in my life because I was afraid I need to talk to somebody about this thing, but it could go anywhere. Well, let's just agree we're going to talk about topic X. Great. Let's talk about X. My intentions for doing this thing are, to have fun, to make money, to get clear about our vacation, like whatever it may be. So, it's your why.
Yeah. So a topic could be everything from let's talk about this project, because we're getting ready to kick off a project, this new contract. I know probably a lot of your listeners are agency people. So, like, hey, we got a new project, we have a new team. So let's talk, we're going to talk about this. And maybe we can even say we're going to talk about it so we're all clear on where we're going. And so our planning is thorough and complete. And so we all don't get overwhelmed and make all the money or something like that, right? We say what we're talking about and why, or in a personal context. Hey, let's talk about, the vacation we're getting ready to take, just to make sure that we all have fun on the vacation. Like, let's just take some time and really talk about it. And I think this is a revolutionary act. No matter what methodology you use after this, right? Just like creating an hour to talk about something that's potentially high stakes that you're all going to do, and talk about it in a vulnerable and personal, and not like a problem solving or negotiating kind of way, but just really just to kind of sit and authentically listen to each other. It's groundbreaking. And then you get into the steps, the intentions, concerns, boundaries, and dreams. And these are just buckets. We usually develop prompt questions that are unique to the thing that we're discussing. So if it's a work project, we could say, why are you a part of this project? Why do you want to be part of this project? And of course, some people might just say, because my boss told me to, because I don't want to get fired. That's great information, right? Or it could be because this particular kind of product is really meaningful to me in this specific way. Like I actually, or I've always wanted to work on a campaign that involves media and, used in this new way. And this is an opportunity for me to try that, so now we start to understand people's values, like one person values not getting fired, another person values learning about something new, another person values the product itself and bringing that into the world and making it successful. All those things are really valid and might work really well together, but it's kind of cool to know that up front.
Yeah, got it. That makes a lot of sense. And as Alex said a few minutes ago, it's setting those ground rules. I think if everyone knows that, they know the playing field then, don't they? And then you can operate with that knowledge. Whether you choose to operate positively because someone's shared that detail or not isn't necessarily what's relevant, because ultimately you're all in. So, hence the name.
And once you share, there's the topic, here are our intentions. And then you get to maybe the easiest part, which is concerns. And our brains are just fear, worry machines. So it's easy to come up with concerns, worries, and fears. But we really encourage you to, dig deep as feels safe for you to share in the context of where you're sharing. Because it really does help your brain and your nervous system calm down so that you eventually can make better decisions. Like, I'm afraid writing this book together will cause us to fight and we'll divorce and die alone. That was the ultimate fear in writing this book together. And as you share your fears, you may hear other people have the same ones and recognize, oh, yeah, okay, I'm not the only one. And it actually relaxes you.
And hearing other people's fears is really really powerful. One of our favorite authors, we mentioned him in the book, is a guy named Chris Voss, who was a hostage negotiator for the FBI for many years. And one of the things he says is that listening is a superpower, and that when you listen, you're actually developing empathy for somebody else's position, which doesn't mean you approve of that position. It means that you develop an understanding, a kind of nuanced understanding of what it is that person wants and what motivates that person. And when someone shares their concern, it can sometimes be threatening to us as well. Like, oh, wait, you're afraid of that? Like if Alex were to share she was afraid of us getting divorced, I'm like, wait, you're thinking about us getting divorced? Not that I had that reaction, because I actually had the same fear, but it's potential. And so, again, just sort of like we're just listening. We're not arguing anybody else's concerns. We're just listening. And then the next step is we get into our boundaries, which is just asking people what helps them be the best. What do they need to feel their best, either at work or on this experience at home, and it could be that, hey, I got a 3-year-old at home and I'm not sleeping well. And, I can't get into a meeting before 10 a.m., that helps me be my best. Doesn't mean they're going to get it, but it means that everybody else has kind of an appreciation of where that person's at. And then some people have, more harder and fast boundaries. Like I don't answer email after 5 p.m. I just, all of my teammates always know that if they send me an email at night, they're not going to get an answer until the following morning at the earliest. And it may not be until the following afternoon, because often I write in the mornings. I'm a little quirky, and I'm also a little later in my career, so maybe I have a little more latitude than I did earlier. But boundaries are just those kinds of things that keep us safe, things that help us perform our best, things that we definitely want to happen or are sure we don't want to have happen, those kinds of things.
And finally, we end on dreams. And dreams is my favorite part. It's where you really go into, if this were to go beautifully, what would be true for me, for you, for the team, for the client, for everyone, like to really get into kind of pie in the sky, big imagination time. And that has the effect of, even if there were some conflicts between concerns and boundary sharing, when we share our dreams, we've found that it's really hard to not want other people's dreams to happen for them too. And so you start sharing what your dreams are, and you hear what other people are dreaming, and you're like, oh yeah, like, okay, it puts us in a better frame of mind to then go into negotiation or problem solving, because we've actually released some oxytocin together. We've gotten excited. We've gotten a little bit bonded together. And that's really where it all comes back together.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I had intended to ask you how the all-in method could be used in personal relationships, but it's so beautifully obvious and simple that I don't think you certainly don't need to answer that.
We found it so useful to talk about things like, we're both, I'm going to just out, I'm middle-aged. Alex is still, no, I think we're both, I turn 55 next week. This is exciting. So I may be even beyond middle-aged. Maybe that's true. But we've talked about, as we get older, we're talking about finances a lot more, and, everything from sort of finances to sexuality to, hell, we live in New York City, and like we get invited to a lot of parties, and we sometimes have energy for them and sometimes don't. So often in the cab on the way to the party, we'll be like, "What's your intention for this party tonight?" I'm like, I want to meet one interesting person and be home in bed by 9. And they're like, okay, all right, cool, all right.
Put that under dreams.
Yeah, put that under dreams. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. No, it's incredible. It sounds like a really brilliantly simple method, but as you said at the start, Bob, there's real power in simplifying the complex. And I think it's a sign of, in general, it's a sign of real intelligence. Dave Trott talks about that a lot, that, especially in our world of marketing and advertising, there's people almost making careers out of turning the simple into complexity. And it's just... It's entirely wrong, but no, it sounds wonderful.
I actually wanted to make one pitch, just knowing your audience a little bit. Like, use this with a client. Use this as a client intake. It's amazing what it really. I've used this in sales. I almost use it as a sales process as a consultant, and it really unlocks really interesting information You don't even have to tell the client that you're doing it. You just say, hey, why are you doing this project? And
Yeah.
what might go wrong with this project? And what are you sure that needs to happen? And what are you sure that needs to not happen? And if this project goes really well, what will be true for you? And then all of that information can help craft a really nice proposal, actually.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's a much nicer and likely more emotive way of phrasing what does success look like for you in this, which is kind of, I suppose, the closest that lots of agencies would get to asking these types of questions.
Yeah.
Very good. We've a couple of listener questions, if I may.
Great.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. But we do have two for you. So you can have one each where you can share these. I don't mind how we go. But question one is from Zoe, and she asks, or she says, throughout the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of families have found themselves spending a lot more time together. Can the radical alignment be used in a family environment, perhaps with young children? So maybe we focus on the young children. We've talked about personal relationships and businesses already.
Absolutely. We've actually taught the method to over 1,000 couples in a couple of different workshops since Corona isolating started in the US here. And we've been using it with our son for years. He's 13 now, but we've been using it with a slightly different language since he was 7 or 8, I'm guessing. And so we absolutely use it with him. And, let's say, why do you want to go on vacation? And, is there anything you're worried about? Anything you're afraid of happening? Any people or situations that you maybe have thoughts about? Is there anything you don't want to do? Is there anything you really want to do? And then, if we're driving home at the end of the vacation and it was so fun, how do you feel? And what was your favorite part? Getting them into that future thinking there. And so that's like a very basic kind of languaging you can begin to use. And it's I have to say, our 13-year-old son is light years beyond where we were at his age, or even in our mid-20s, in terms of being able to have tough conversations and listen to other people's ideas, thoughts, and feelings. And he has said things recently like, I'm really glad I'm being raised learning to care about other people's feelings. Like, that's pretty awesome. I mean, I'll be honest, that was like the biggest parenting moment of my life to hear.
Yeah, no doubt.
But you can use this for all kinds of family conversations with all different ages, and just like keep coming back to it, commit to using it. It really becomes an easy tool over time.
And we've definitely used it around COVID. We do live in a very busy, Brooklyn neighborhood here. And, one, getting clear on our intentions, like, why are we social distancing? Well, we're social distancing to keep ourselves safe, flatten the curve and with our community, and being able to communicate that to him really clearly, like, any rules that we're imposing on you now, like, this is why. And then also really, we have to think about boundaries. So it's really COVID has brought up both a lot of concerns, like there are so many fears associated with it, from economic to biological, right, to health and relational. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to go insane in this apartment. So then you're like, okay, so I'm going to go for a bike ride every day to get out. When I do go out, I'm going to wear a mask, like, we're going to wash our hands as soon as we get back in the house. Like, just really being explicit about these things is super helpful. And then even asking about dreams around COVID may seem kind of weird, but hell, it's the situation we find ourselves in. So let's imagine a best case scenario for it. We all survive it. The country's economy doesn't break down completely, and perhaps we are dreaming of a change in leadership in our government here.
Perhaps. Actively working for it every day. Sorry.
Yeah. No. You keep that on the record.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. Especially with the current context, and clearly there's differences with us in the UK and you guys in where you are in Brooklyn. But even yesterday there was an altercation that I saw footage of in a supermarket locally where a customer wasn't adhering to social distancing with the lady at the checkout at the till. and he was complaining about how poorly the government has dealt with the crisis. I mean, whether that's true or not is subjective. And her point to him was, well, I agree, it's a mess, but you and I can look after each other. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I need you to take a step back, sir. And he was totally floored by that. And he said, oh, yeah, you're right. And it was brilliant to kind of just add that context between the two of them, almost create that level playing field of, we can agree about the government maybe hasn't dealt with the situation as effectively as they should have done, but let's park that and agree on that. But you and I can do something now. And it was amazing.
Mm.
What I love about that, I really feel like that captures something that I really value about our methodology, about the book, or about just kind of this kind of work, is those moments where you actually feel like, oh, I'm actually with you. You know, like I'm on your team. We're actually all on the same team. And I don't, I do think there's times in life where you actually have to treat people as hostile, and you negotiate for everything it's worth and all of that. And I do believe enemies exist. You know, I'm not a complete peacenik or something. You know, I'm mostly pacifist. But anyway, all of that aside, it's these moments. I think these moments are much more available to us than we actually think, going through life. And I think our intent behind this method is not to solve every problem for everybody everywhere, but it's to keep those problems that don't need to develop from developing, right? Because most of the time, I think most people who are doing something together actually kind of want to be doing that thing together. We're such a social species. We love to be with each other. And I really I actually got emotional when you described that, what a sweet moment that must have been to witness and to go through and to experience for those two people.
Yeah, totally. I must show my hand though and say I also celebrated hearing someone say to someone who was complaining about having to wear a mask, and this guy said that the main reason I want you to wear a mask is so I don't have to hear you bitching about having to wear a fucking mask. So I'm just showing my hand there.
Those gotcha moments certainly release some dopamine and make us all feel good.
Exactly. Question 2 is from Andy. Andy asks, what is the greatest challenge in establishing good communications that you have come across, either in work or life?
Bob may have a different answer, but for me, it's this idea that keeps coming up again and again of, is this person really trying to meet me in good faith? Proper, real communication can only happen if you're willing to meet each other and really listen, and maybe even be willing to be changed by them and their perspective. And I've personally had a couple of interactions in the last few weeks that were kind of straddled professional and personal. And it became very clear that, okay, this person is, like, going back to the 4 horsemen. They're incredibly defensive and stonewalling. Like, they are not able or willing to meet me in good faith and have a real, honest, vulnerable conversation. So I'm not sure if you have a different one.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates for me. And I think one of the things that I try to determine a lot is somebody communicating in good faith, and am I communicating in good faith? Because I think often we have this idea that, the way our legal system is structured, right? It's very combative. It's like each person fights super hard for their side, and somehow truth is supposed to emerge from that process, or justice is supposed to emerge from that process. And I think I don't think it works that way. I don't think that's the way justice and truth really work. I think it's much more of an inquiry. And certainly in our rather polarized political landscape, which I really think is driven by commerce as much as anything, right? Like people like, Alex Jones or Ben Shapiro, or, the left has their own as well. But like that they want more attention. And so therefore they're generating more controversy. They're generating more outrage among their listenership, which creates people like sticking around longer, more page views and more time listening and more ad impressions, those kinds of things. And, and I get caught up in that almost in my personal. It's one of the reasons I've left social media, is because I found myself engaging in social media in that way. I would assume that people were stupid. I would assume that they were evil if they held a different opinion to me, rather than just sort of assuming like, oh, they maybe they have something to teach me, or maybe I have something to teach them, and can we engage here and figure that out? But that's, again, I think that goes back to emotional maturity. I think that, for myself and the people that I'm engaging with.
It's a really interesting point, that, and I've shared this anecdote once before on this podcast when I spoke to a wonderful lady called Shalina Yan Mohammed, who works at Ogilvy, and it's a story of Bill Bernbach, who you may be familiar with. He's a great ad man of yesterday, and he used to carry around he had, I think, embroidered, or he carried around a card on the inside pocket of his blazer that he religiously wore, and every time he felt he was in a discussion that was heading towards being quite a heated debate, where the views were entirely different to his own, he would open his his jacket, and read the words "they might be right," just to kind of reframe his head, thinking, I think I'm right, but this person thinks they're right, so let me explore the reasons why he thinks he's right, and he puts that down to why he was very successful in life in general.
God, I love that so much.
Yeah, curiosity is so valuable. I was reading up on like Darwin recently, and also Richard Feynman, who is a scientist who I really respect. But they all have this kind of sense of curiosity about the world, and almost a non-ideological position about things, which I find, I don't know, and being willing to question oneself, I think, is probably one of the more powerful things you can do.
Yeah, agreed. Well, great answers both. Thank you. The final part of our interview is our four pertinent poses that all of our guests have to answer. So number one is, what advice would you give to your younger selves?
For me, it's and it's something that I'm coming to rather late in life, and it's stick through things even when they're hard, right? Even when you get criticized, or when you get criticism, continue to work on your craft. And maybe it's more of like create with the door closed a little more often, but continue to create, work through the adversity. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever said this before. You are not responsible for your parents' mental health.
I'm going to steal that one. Can I take it?
Yeah, you can have that one too.
Yeah. Amazing. That's brilliant. If you could banish one thing from your industry, what would it be and why, is question 2. But I'm not sure if banishing anything is the right attitude given the context of our episode.
I would just say, for me, it's a rigidity around frameworks and certifications, because it's just sort of rampant in the management consulting and sort of process reengineering business, which is kind of where I find myself a lot. So things around like Agile and workflow, and say, it's just, we just tend to be like, this is how the world works, and this is how we're going to make the world work. And because we've thought of it, now it's real, and we're just going to sell the hell out of it. I really don't like that. And if I could get rid of like those 2x2 boxes that all the consultants draw, but then again, they're a crutch that I depend on a lot.
You use them all the time. Who are you trying to kid?
You tell us, Alex. I bet he's working on one right now.
If I could banish one thing from my industry, I think it would be this over-reliance on sharing memes that are so oversimplified and end up making people feel bad about the complexities of who they are.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Number 3. So aside from your soon-to-be released book, Radical Alignment, How to Have Game-Changing Conversations That Will Transform Your Business and Your Life, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
I have to say The Artist's Way, which we already shouted out, and Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Also, we talked about that too.
Yeah. He's on Masterclass. Am I right? He's got a short Masterclass.
Yeah,
I highly recommend that one. Where you can hear our voices turning around, because we're turning around and looking at our bookshelves. We're like, what do we recommend?
And those are the top 2. Right?
Actually, one that's been coming to mind for me recently, it's old and it's out of print now, but it's a book called System Antics. Okay. It's all one word, and it's by a guy named John Gall, who actually was a pediatrician in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And very weirdly, I quoted him in my first book, and then a friend of mine who lives in Ann Arbor and who's also an author himself and he's a bit older. He's like, I used to take my kids to John, and I never knew he was like a systems theorist. I just thought his office ran really, really well. Like there was never a wait time in his office. But it's one of these really beautiful. I mean, so Systemantics, and then Donella Meadows was it the primer of Systems Primer? The exact name is escaping me. Anyway, these are books that are sort of like at the foundations of systems theory, and I think I go back to them all the time.
Perfect. Great. We'll add all of those as links to this episode. And the fourth, it's less of a question, but we always dedicate every episode to somebody, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guests who have to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
I'm going to have to say my kid.
I knew.
Yeah.
I knew it. Yeah.
He so inspires me to do better. And dang, I'm so proud of him.
Yeah.
But really, I've had to like really dig deep and learn so much more being his mom.
Yeah. Amazing.
I second that entirely, but I just want to add one brief one. But I was just so impressed with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech about kind of the sexism in the Senate on the floor.
Oh, it was brilliant. It was beautiful.
It was so inspiring and so brilliant.
The
House, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to your kid and to the wonderful AOC as well. I mean, she's an absolute wonderful, wonderful woman, and she's so brilliantly articulate. And that what you're referencing there, I think I played that on loop a few times here. It's just every time she speaks, it's hard not to listen and find it incredibly engaging.
Yeah.
Does your lad ship skateboards internationally, I must ask?
Oh, he would be thrilled, and his mother would help him figure out how to do that.
Hey, amazing. Well, we're going to put an order in then. Fantastic. As a final call to action then, everyone listening can head over to this episode online, where we'll share links to absolutely everything we've discussed, from Radical Alignment. We'll throw in all of the books, including The Artist's Way, Never Split the Difference, Systemantics, if we can find that in print. How else can people get more Alex Jamieson and Bob Gower?
I think just the book website
is
where we're sending people.
You can always Google our names, and it's very easy to find us. But I would say the book is really what it's all about for us right now, and which is radicalalignmentbook.com. And we are launching the week of August 11th, and we're offering a bunch of stuff to people who order that week. So, or before. You can actually do it. Take action immediately as soon as you listen to this, including an 8-week seminar with us for those who order 10 copies or more, or pre-order 10 copies or more.
Oh, brilliant. We'll get on it now, listeners, and you could be one of the lucky ones. Amazing. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to talk to you both.
We have so enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Giles.
And finally, thank you to everybody listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share it and review the pod. We hugely value your support. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find GASP online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram, or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.